Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Forest County Bigfoot Festival. Can you all hear me? All right, first row can hear me. Great. Anyways, my name is Mike Femlon. I'm your MC for this event. I produce a show in the shadow of Big Red Eye. We have a booth over there. We sell some really cool stuff. We have Bigfoot cast for you guys to see as well. You guys want to know a funny story about when I was Bigfooting one time? I was up in Whitehall, New York. Is anybody familiar with Whitehall, New York? No, it's right on the border of the Adirondack Mountains. Very beautiful. And I was researching with a pair of twins, and it was really buggy that night. It was like 187 degrees, August night. My idea was to walk through this grass about yay tall through a mile back to this place that I wanted to see to investigate, right? So like I said, it was August. It was very hot out, and I'm putting on bug spray. The mosquitoes are like, it's insane. And for a Bigfoot researcher to say that it's mosquito-y, it's got to be pretty bad. So I'm putting on bug spray like it's my job, right? And I throw it to the pair of twins, and they're like, no, we have our own stuff. So I said, okay, fine, whatever. And then we're hiking, and we're walking through the woods, and they start spraying something. Remember I said it was really hot? It's one of those hikes that you don't want to do anymore. You know, your mouth is open, and they start spraying this stuff, and it's wafting back into my direction. And it tastes and smells horrible. It's really bad, right? So finally, I kept my composure together, and after we got out of the woods, I'm like, guys, what kind of bug spray did you put on? And they're like, well, nothing. We didn't put any bug spray on. I'm like, well, what is it that you sprayed? And they're like, oh, the deer urine? Yeah, that's the time I got deer urine. Ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker is from Adam A., West Virginia. He is a great friend of mine. He's been researching since 2017. Bigfoot since 2017. He's a good friend of mine from West Virginia, ladies and gentlemen, Les Odell.
All right, I'm not used to holding one of these very much. Anyway, my name's Les Odell. Like he said, technically I don't call myself a researcher. I actually call myself an investigator, mainly because I don't really have anything concrete to research yet. I mean, I do research stories, I do research older accounts, newspapers, stuff like that, but I have not found something that I actually research. You know, I've not been out there and found an area where I can go research and find something. So with that being said, you see it says Bigfoot investigator, paranormal investigator. Well, I'm a little different than a lot of the other Bigfoot guys. I got started in the paranormal, and yeah, no, I'm not going to say I'm a paranormal Bigfoot guy. I'm not going to say that. I'm not at all. But how I got started in all of this stuff is from an experience I had as a kid. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I lived in this old farmhouse. We just moved in this old farmhouse. And from the time we moved in there, I had the weirdest feeling that something was in this house, and it just gave me the weirdest, creepy feeling. Well, over several nights through the time we lived there, I started seeing these little shadows that would move from one wall to the next wall in my bedroom. And I'd sit there and look at them, and then I'd cover my head, and I'd try to scream for my dad. Couldn't scream for my dad. Eventually they'd go away, or I'd fall asleep. Well, that went on for a few days. There weren't consecutive days for the time we lived there. And then one night I'm in bed, and my brother and I shared bunk beds. I'm on the bottom bunk, and I'm watching these shadows again. And I looked over in the corner, and I could see this tall shadow standing in the corner. At that time, I pulled the blankets up. This time I didn't cover my head up. I actually sat up in bed. And when I did that, whatever this thing was in the corner turned its head, and within an instant was like 8 to 10 inches from my face. It leaned underneath the bed and was right here. So that's how I got started into paranormal investigating. It led me into researching a lot of locations I would go to. Then it led me to investigating other homes that people would call me about, and eventually got into the Bigfoot stuff. My son and I done the paranormal investigating together, and then when he got into the Bigfoot stuff in 2016, 2017, we looked into a few things, started doing stuff on our own, And then we started a Facebook page called West Virginia Cryptids and Strange Encounters. Now, he and I are the co-founders. And after we did that, people started coming to us saying, hey, we've had, and it wasn't just Bigfoot, it was everything, ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot. But then it seemed to turn just all Bigfoot in West Virginia. I had several people would call me weekly, either call me, message me, email me, and I would spend hours of the time talking to people on the phone or via emails, and started collecting stories. And that's where it started, was just collecting the stories. And then people started asking me to come to investigate their property. So I started doing that, and it led to a lot of stuff like this now. A lot of doing some events and getting the Bigfoot or the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum up and running. I'm actually the founder, one of the founding contributors, I guess you'd call me, of the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum. So I know you guys aren't going to be able to see all this stuff. So it says Bigfoot in West Virginia, are they here? And I'll have to read that to you. In West Virginia, is the West Virginia most forested state? No. We're called the Mountain State, but believe it or not, we are the third most forested state in the Union. Washington's 1, Maine's 2, and West Virginia's number 3. As you can see here, can you guys see this one? The Monongahela Hill National Forest, located in Allegheny Mountains, established April 28, 1920, is 921,000 acres. It's a big part of the eastern part of West Virginia. It includes 10 counties. The highest point is 4,863 feet. That's another map you probably can't see. We have 46 named rivers, numerous creeks, streams, and tributaries. Too many to list. We have 121 public lakes and ponds, numerous private bodies, and numerous private bodies of water. Trout Pond in Hardy, West Virginia, is the only natural lake in West Virginia. The reason for that is because of the mountains and valleys. There's really no lakes. They had to dam everything up to make lakes. So the reason I told you that is one of my research areas we're investigating here, whatever you want to call it, is the Blackwater Falls area. More the Canaan Loop area in that area. There's a story from the Blackwater Falls area that dates back to the 1960s, and because of that story, the creature there, or whatever it is, has been given the name Canyon Monster. In 1960, there was a bunch of young men that went camping along the Blackwater Falls Ridge. One of them was chopping wood along outside the camp. He had the fire going. He was chopping wood for the fire. And he's thinking his buddies were behind him. He actually stood up. Something pokes him in the back. He turns around, and he's standing face to face with what he said is 7 to 8 feet tall, all black, with red eyes and covered in hair. So that was one area I started to research quite a bit, or go to quite a bit, and I actually started collecting stories from there. There was a couple. They were in the 1970s. Were driving from Davis, West Virginia, to Parsons, and they experienced something of the same description. It crossed the road in front of them. It was black in color, all hair, long black hair, same thing, red eyes. So this is only a decade later. Then in 2018, I talked to a lady that was in the same area from Davis to Parsons. She had an encounter with something that was, to me, probably one of the strangest descriptions of one of these things that I've ever heard. She said it come across the road, all black, and she didn't say anything about red eyes, but she said it had a pot belly, like a gut. And she said the best way she can describe it, it looked like a black hairy Grinch from Grinch Who Stole Christmas. So we started going, my son and I started going there quite a bit. Actually, I know you guys can't see this, but it's a camp that I would go to. I camped back in the woods a bit in Pine Forest. And it was 2020. I don't know if anybody remembers, maybe not up here, but in that area in 2020, in January, we had cold. And then we had like 2 or 3 days it was real warm. It was like 70 degrees. And so I decided to go up there on that warm days. And I went up, the snow had started melting off. And me and my son were hiking around. looking at stuff, and I end up, if you see over my table, I got it's a replica of the cast I have. I found a cast in the pine duff in that area. So that led, I don't know, there's the area that I was in. There's the cast right there that I cast. The only reason I think there was one is because we had snow that like prior few weeks, and it melted, and this was under a tree. I think the tree is what protected this from getting destroyed. It's actually 13 inches by 6.5 inches, and it only had 4 toes. Not because I think it only had 4 toes. For some reason, the 4th toe didn't translate into the cast. It either stepped on, I think it was either stepped on a root or rock, and it didn't translate into the soft material. And if you can see here, I know it's hard to see, but I actually do rubbings in my cast. A lot of people have never heard anybody do that. I actually was sitting in my desk one day looking at the cast I had. I'm like, it'd be cool some way to make the features come out. And then I remember, hey, 4th grade, we used to take leaves and stuff and we rub it with crayons and then make these little rubbings. So I decided to put paper over my cast, rub them, and it ended up coming up. You can see all the detail from the cast. Not like ridges or anything, but you can see the toes, the arch, the heels, and stuff like that. Like I said, they're hard to see there. Spruce Knob is one of the highest points, is the highest point in West Virginia. It's 4,862 feet. It's another area that I like to go. I actually like the bottom area of Spruce Knob called Osceola. I found a couple prints there in 2021. There's one of them casted there. But anyway, I don't know. Okay, if anybody has questions, you ask me anytime you want to. So we don't. It's hard to see this stuff, so it's hard to get through it. Anyway, I found these casts, or found these prints, and I casted them, and I decided, hey, I'm gonna go back the week later. And I went back, or the day I found them, I hiked way back up in the valley, and then come back, as they were curing. Pulled the cast. Next week I said, I'm gonna come back. Told myself I'm gonna come back. When I got back the following week, I don't know if anybody can see this, where I went across the creek to do my hiking, there was something put 2 big trees or 2 saplings in an X between 2 trees. Nobody knew I was there. Nobody knew I was coming back. I don't know if anybody can see that, but there's the X. I know it's hard to see, but it was wider than this, but they were about this big around, and it was crossed out. I'm one to tell you that I have no idea, but a lot of people speculate that. It didn't stop me. I still go back. Yeah. Right. I've had that happen as well. Actually, one of them was actually in that area. It was another time after this happened, I went back and I take the same path up in. What I do is I follow the stream up in, and I'll flank off in different areas and check out rock formations, cave areas and some fields and stuff like that. And I was coming back down the trail, and I found one across that something had broken across. But the interesting part about this, before this happened, when I actually found the cast, I had hiked about a mile back in, along this little stream, and I decided to flank off to the right, and I'd head back down, probably about 100 feet off the stream. And people are like, some people are like, oh, 100 feet's not that bad. Where I'm at, you can't see from here to you sometimes, So what I'm looking for is the soft black mud that I found the other cast or the other prints in. And I started checking out these low areas and looking, and I found one, and I'm checking it out. And the creek would be here. It'd come up into a low flat, and there's a bank, and then there's rocks, and then there's the little above the rocks. I hear something moving along the rocks. I can hear it in the brush. I turned, whatever it was took off running. So I don't know if something, whatever, if something that made that was watching me, or if it was a bear or something. But yeah, I can't say it was a Bigfoot, but I did have an experience. There's the X again, if anybody can see it. These here, I kind of upset a lot of people when I talk about this. I'm not a big proponent of cheap tree structures at all. I'm really not. There's too many human elements out there, especially in a lot of these areas, that they can happen. You have bushcrafters, you got Boy Scouts that go out here that are learning how to do this survival. You have this here, which I've had many people say, "Yep, Bigfoot, absolutely." No, that's a turkey blind. That is in the middle of a field, right off the road, and I show people this to say, "What do you think that is?" And it's hard to see. It's a tree in the middle, and you got all these sticks around it leaning in, and they're like, "Yeah, that's absolutely a Bigfoot structure." It's a turkey blind. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, where the X was at, I actually found two prints. They weren't great, but there was two of them. Yeah, yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, I have seen some unexplainable things, that are hard to explain. But like some of the tree structures, a lot of people I see claim to find, there's really a really rational reason for them. Now, some of them that you can find out in the Pacific Northwest, and Colorado, and British Columbia, and stuff like that, where they have what they call the floating branch, which is sometimes very large, and they have stuff coming off of it. Now, that's hard to explain. I mean, it'd be hard for a human to build that. Again, these are, like I said, these are most likely turkey blinds that somebody's built for turkey hunting. The Elk River Wildlife Management Area. I know you guys can't see that. I had a man call me, said, "Hey, I have an experience while I was trout fishing in the wildlife management area." Huh? Oh, and he said what he was doing. He was fishing along this little stream, and it was actually like along a road, and there was like the it wasn't a bridge. It was like the pipes that come underneath the road, big pipes, the culverts, and the stream run through it. And he looked up through the pipes, and he sees this thing 7 or 8 feet tall. He said he estimated, but it was bent down or whatever, looking through the pipes at him as he's fishing. So I started looking into that area. I found a guy that said on his property he was hearing screams and howls and hoots and all kinds of stuff. So I went near his property on the wildlife management area. I was about 1.5 miles back in, and I come up to a point, and I noticed that there's a big rock on this point, and I could see something on this point. And what it was, like I said, you can't see it on here. It was two rocks. There's a smaller one, then a pointed one, and there's a stick about 18 inches long just balancing on these two rocks. Strangest thing I found, and the bad thing is, it was cold, it was raining, and I have no idea how these were staying there. They're perfectly balanced and just teetering back and forth. It couldn't have been there long, I wouldn't think, because I thought he probably would have fell. But it was something strange I found. And like I said, not sure if it's Bigfoot related. But yeah, there it is if anybody can see it. But I thought it was pretty interesting to document. These are more rock stacks. Can easily be explained by humans, yeah. But where these are in actually, when the lake is full, they're out in the water. Is what was pretty cool about these. Some of them are smaller. Like I said, they easily can be human made. But I just found it interesting that because I hiked the mud flats down to Sutton and stuff, and in Burnsville, to see if I find tracks, and I find these rock stacks, but they're usually out when the lake's full. They're in the water. They're like out of the water, but when the lake's up, they're surrounded by water. I did find one where I found the track that I was talking about in Tucker County in 2020. We'll go back to the Canyon Monster. We'll go back to it a little bit. I was telling you that kid was chopping wood. Well, I was in Canaan Loop by myself for one whole night. My buddy Daniel shows up, and my son and his friend are supposed to come, and we're supposed to do a little bit of hiking and checking some stuff out. Well, my son comes in on the second day, and as he's coming in, he stops and he grabs. Somebody had a dead pine tree in their yard in one of the cabins, and they cut it up and they put it out by the road. It said free firewood. So he picked a bunch of it up, and he got to the camp, unloaded it, and he had an old axe that was just dull as hell. And if anybody's ever tried to split old pine, it's not the easiest wood to split. So he beat on that wood probably for 2 hours. Just beat on it, and finally got it all split up. And we started burning it, and then probably about a half hour after he split that wood, that knocking on that wood, we hear this howl come from over along the valley, and just was like nothing I've ever heard before. First time I've ever heard it, and not the last, but the first time. So the next morning, my buddy Daniel had to leave, and my son and I and his friend were at camp, and I told him, I said, I need to see where this howl comes from, at least to go over in the area. He stayed at camp. He followed me on GPS and stuff like that. So it was a ways across there. You had to go through a pine forest. We have what we call blister swamps down in the highlands of West Virginia. You guys know what that is? It's actually peat moss. It's about 2 feet deep, and it's all water underneath of it. And you'll sink clear up to here. And we just call them blister swamps. So you had to cross one of those, cross a creek, cross another blister swamp, into the hardwood and up the hill to where I thought maybe this sound had come from. And I don't think I have a picture of it on here. But as I'm going up into that hardwood, and it was like it come out as a point, I actually find you're talking about the rock stacks, how big they are. I found one that was huge, it was massive. It stands about this tall, the bottom rock, maybe that big, and this thick. So I thought that was interesting. Started looking around a little bit more in the area. Found soccer ball size like rocks that had been bashed like on other rocks. I don't know the significance of that. Not sure whatsoever. Could somebody been there and done what I've seen? Yeah, but it's a hell of a trek to get in there, and you probably had 3 or 4 guys lift some of those rocks. So I thought it was pretty interesting to find those. This here's another track I found. I don't know how do I want to explain this. I got contacted by, I don't know if anybody watch Finding Bigfoot and what's the other one? Finding Bigfoot and Expedition Bigfoot, I think it is. There was a guy who was on there from West Virginia named Billy Humphreys. He was on both shows. I was the first one to ever investigate his sighting on his property. In 2019, October 2019, he has a deer blind, and he kept putting food out, and he put all their food out for bears and deer, whatever to eat, whatever they had at the house. They just said throw it in the garbage. They threw it and put it out for the animals. Well, his wife had shot a bear like a couple months before or something like that, and they started putting food out again. So he started putting corn out for the deer. Well, he noticed that corn and everything would be gone overnight. That's usually going to happen. So he thought that was weird. And he thought, well, there's got to be another bear coming eating and eating the food. So they decided to go up, set in the blind. And he did first. He wanted to go up, put on the blind, see if he could see what's coming in. And he actually took a motion detecting light, put behind his blind. He said as high as he could reach, which he was 6'1", so he could reach around 7 foot something. And he put this light up on the tree behind it. And he's sitting in his blind, and he can hear something coming around behind the blind. he's thinking it's a bear or deer or something behind him. But then he noticed the light kicks on, which is not uncommon. You know, they'll pick up at different heights. But then he noticed that the light actually gets blocked out. It blocks between his blind and the tree. So that freaked him out. So he started telling his wife, or texting his wife, hey, something's up here. I don't know what's going on, but it's strange. I have a weird feeling, and I'm going to get ready to come to the house. So he goes to the house. So they decided, okay, we're going to continue to monitor with the food. They continued to monitor with the food and how much is being taken. So a few days later, him and her both went to the blind, and they're sitting in there, and he had like this little rack across the front of his blind and had calls hanging on it. And he's fiddling with these calls, and his wife goes, oh my God, there he is. And he's thinking she's meaning the bear, because he's completely skeptic of any of it. And he goes, what, a bear? She goes, no, it's a Bigfoot. And he actually takes his phone out and pulls it up and takes a picture. And that picture's got a lot of attention. So I was contacted to come down and investigate his property. I did, found a track on his property. It was only one track. But the weird thing is, when he seen this thing and took a picture, it was when we measured it was 165 feet away. He said there's no way it could hear. He said I wouldn't think would hear. But when he took that picture, it screams and turns its arm like they're this way. It turns this way and goes running, just crashing through the woods. So, and I asked him, I said, okay, you know, he's telling me, he said, I'm a Marine. He said, I've been here, been that, I've seen this, I've seen that. I said, what'd you do when you saw that thing? He said, I went home. I said, what'd you do? What about Sheena? He said, I don't know, I left her in the blind. So, yeah. So I've been back to his property 3 times. I've only found the one cast or one print, but I did manage to get another story out of his wife, that he had no idea that she had another sighting. And her sighting was actually prior to the one they had together. It was like 2 years prior, and she was outside. She had been washing laundry, and it was a nice day. I forget exactly what day. But she's washing laundry, and she decided she would take the linens and hang them on the line outside. So she goes out and she hangs them up. Later on, she decides I got to get them down. She goes out to pull the linens down and put them in a basket. And she looks down at the other end of the T-post, on the T-post on the other end of the line, and she noticed what she thinks is coveralls hanging on the T-post. And she goes, I don't remember washing any coverall. And then it moves. And she drops the basket. And this thing actually drops its arms and takes off running, screaming and crashing. It jumps the fence, their neighbor's fence, like barbed wire fence, and runs in the same direction as the one did in a couple months later. So that's one of my favorite ones that I've taken. And like I said, he's got a lot of attention for it. And some people called him a hoaxer and stuff. But I really, he may have done a couple of things that weren't right later, but I think he had a true experience that day, and the picture's pretty interesting. And then last year, I get a phone call from a guy. He said, hey, I found you online. I'm not a big believer in this stuff. He said, but I had seen something. Oh, let me hear first. The one thing Billy kept saying is you could see, he says, all brown color, but under its eyes, there was blonde hair on both sides. So he's like, so this other guy's like, I don't believe in this stuff. He said, I was taking my kids to school. He's like, hey, I seen something when I took my kids to school. I don't believe in this stuff, but I found you online and I want to share your story or share the story with you. And I said, what did you see? He said, well, I'm traveling up this road, and he asked me, anybody know what kudzu vine is? Yeah, if you don't know what it is, it takes over everything. It kills everything, takes over. And he's like, this kudzu vine growed all along both sides of the road. And he said, I'm going up the road, and he said, I see something part the kudzu vine and stick its head out. He said, the best thing I could describe it as is brownish red, almost kind of orangutan color. And then he told me, he said, but there was something very distinctive about it. I was like, what's that? He said, you could see blonde hair under its eyes. Well, this guy sighting took place on, in larger scale, I think kind of far away, but it's only 50 miles. But still, it's kind of validation for what Billy's story was. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, there, you can't see it, but that's the pictures there. And there's the one with the kudzu. The guy actually did a drawing for me. He actually did a drawing and sent it to me. That's a cast, another cast we found in Tucker County, my son and I. And that's when I told you about the howl in Tucker County we heard. That's my buddy Daniel out there with his parabolic mic, see if we can hear it again. I know it's hard to see on there, but there's the rock stack. Anybody, you asked about that big rock stack, this is it. If you want to come up and look at it, you can see it. Come up here, you can see it. But it's, this is the big one. And it stood about this tall. Yes. Huh? Not quite like the Ohio howl that you hear. It was a little more, like kind of high pitched, a little bit, but went on for it seemed like forever. And then right after it did, coyotes everywhere and went crazy. Yeah. Right. But yeah, it was. I've never heard it before, and then, well, that was the first time. I have heard it another time, which I'll actually. Well, we'll go into that. I'll tell you about that. I go there called Little River. It's in Pocahontas County. Yeah, Pocahontas County. And a buddy of mine down there does a lot of research in that area. He gives me a call one evening. He said, "Hey, you know where he's camping in the Little River?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "I went back, a few nights ago, or a couple nights ago." He said, "I'm sitting in the same spot." He's actually in his car, like right off it's a primitive campsite right off the road. And where we're at is 10 miles from any town. There's nothing for 10 miles. So he's sitting there, he said, and he hears a whoop come from across, like if you go out of the campsite, it goes down, there's the river creek, whatever, and then goes up the hill, the ridge to the mountain, up on the mountain. And he said, "I hear a whoop." And so he's sitting there, and within a few seconds, he hears it again. Except this time it's not in front of him, it's actually off to the side. And he's like, "Well, man, whatever this is moving fast." But then within a few seconds, again, he hears another one off to his left. So he's getting a little bit frightened, I guess. He starts to get in his car, and from behind his car, like across the gravel road on the next bank behind it, he couldn't see anything. He hears a whoop, then a real deep guttural growl come from across the road. So he quickly got in the car, got home, called me. I went back with him a couple days later, and we're sitting in the same area. We both got parabolic mics, listening to what we could hear. He takes his off, he's fiddling with it for some reason, and I hear the same howl that I heard in Tucker County come from the ridge, and all of a sudden, same as it did then, the coyotes everywhere that they were at went nuts. So, anybody got a question? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, a little bit it's a money thing, and two, it's just my ignorance, to be honest with you. I've learned that now, but back then when I was finally getting started into it, when I found my first cast, it was like, oh man, I found a cast, so let's do it, But yeah, I do have like a little DNA collection kits that I keep with me now if I find any hair or anything, and I will take, if I do find any other prints, I will take like whether it's a grass, leaf, or anything sample from the cast now. Anybody else? Yeah. Here's the thing. I didn't say I don't believe in the paranormal Bigfoot. Okay, here's my stance on the paranormal Bigfoot. There's a lot of people out there that won't take a report, no matter unless it's flesh and blood. But okay. I'll take every report I hear. Mainly because in my heart, I want what people are seeing, I want it to be something physical. I want it to be flesh and blood, you know. But the reason I'll take the other reports, because if you start doing that, you actually find there are some strange aspects to some of these stories. Whether the stuff that people are seeing is complete, eventually, if there is something paranormal about like that, I think it's going to be, there's some kind of separation. It's something different, possibly. You know, when you hear stories that things disappear, they do this and that, yeah, that's definitely a paranormal deal. But when you hear like the stuff that's in the Pacific Northwest, where they're finding, the Olympic Project find the nest and stuff, that's an animal. There's something building those nests. Yeah. But if you, I've taken some weird stuff. I think let me see. One of the weird, there's 3 different ones I can tell you about. One was down in Fayette County, West Virginia. This guy was a truck driver for a dairy farm. And he was coming down the road from the dairy farm. I can't remember the name, which road it was. But he said, I see something about 75 yards out in my headlights come into the road. And he said, when I look at it, it looks like a large ape standing upright. And I was like, that's cool. He said, no, here's what's strange. I slowed down to almost a stop. And then I kind of creep along. This thing turns toward the truck and like kind of starts to walk in that direction. I was like, yeah. I said, how'd you feel about that? He's like, frightened. He said, but then, he said, the damnedest thing happened. I was like, what's that? And he said, I noticed it started to almost look like it was going on all fours to shrink, like shrinking down, or how are you on all fours? Which you hear about them doing. But he told me, he said, I'm telling you a true story. He said, I'm a driver. I don't partake in any drugs or anything. He said, this thing turned into a buck deer and ran off the road into the woods. That's strange. Yeah. The other one I took was in, I can't remember the county right offhand, but the same thing. This guy was driving down the road at night. It was actually in a residential area, and he sees this thing. Well, first he says he starts to hear this humming noise, like almost a vibration humming noise, and his car shuts off, and he's like, something's wrong with my car, and then the street light shuts off, like in this residential area, and then he sees this thing that he describes. He said, the only thing I can describe is what you see on TV as a Sasquatch. It comes up over the bank, walks across the road. As it starts off the other bank, it just disappears completely, like vanishes. Not goes in the woods or anything, just vanishes. And he's like, then my car starts, the light comes back on, and I'm able to leave. So, and I find that interesting because I took that one probably 2020, and there's actually, John Keel actually wrote a book about some strange sightings, and he actually talks about one in West Virginia about pretty much the same thing happened. This other one, I haven't got the chance to go down and talk to this guy, but I don't know if anybody's ever heard the Native American lore. They say they come from the trees. You ever hear that? Some Native American tribes believe these things come from the trees. I don't really know if they mean come from trees or they mean they live in the forest and come out. Well, anyway, this guy contacts me. He said, man, I know you're going to think I'm weird. You think I'm strange. He said, but my aunt's property has some weird stuff going on this property. And I was like, yeah, what kind of stuff? He said, for instance, there's a big stump on this property. He said, of a big tree, a fallen tree has been years and years gone. He said, I've actually seen these things come from the stump. He said, they look like they emerge from the stump, transform into the Sasquatch, and go into the woods. So is that what the Native Americans actually mean? I'm not sure, but it was just a pretty interesting story. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we know, and some people don't like to hear that we don't know. We really don't know. About pretty much everything that we talk about as far as Bigfoot related and stuff like that is based on theories that people would come up with. You know, everybody has their own theory about what goes on. So, yeah, it's pretty. There can be pretty wild stuff. Yeah. Another, I get the reason like some people don't like to hear what I say sometimes because I came from the paranormal background, so I try to debunk everything I can, and I look into it hard. I try to look at it as logically as I can. So that's why I have a hard time with stick structures and stuff like that. So yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Who's had an experience? Who? Now? Who? Okay. Okay. We're gonna call you guys knowers, I guess. So you had your experience, and I'm very, very honored to have you guys. You know, who else here believes in Bigfoot? Okay, where's your belief come from? Okay, I'll tell you. Somebody will ask me if I'm a believer. I'll tell them there's two answers I'll give them. I'm a skeptic believer, which is kind of a what do they call that, contradiction, or I tell them I'm a proxy believer, mainly because my belief of what people or what's out there is because I've talked to so many credible people that I feel are credible, and I've talked to a lot of people that are BS too. But I've talked to a lot of credible people that I know they have had something happen to them. And there's different ways you learn that through interviews. As you start watching body language, you can tell by inflection of the voice. One thing I do to kind of see how to judge or gauge a story is if they had a sighting. I carry these little 4x4 pictures of faces that have been AI or whatever you want to call them, generated, but they're artist renditions of faces of what people are supposedly have seen. And when I go to an investigation and I interview folks, I will show them these pictures and say, hey, can you pick out a face that looks like what you saw, or can you pick out features so I can get an idea of, in my head of what you saw? Not only do I do that, but I use it as what I call a BS tale. If I bring you up and I put those pictures out and I see you wince back or I see you have a trigger, you're probably telling me a story, or you're probably telling me the truth. But if I see you come up and say, oh yeah, it was that one right there, it was that one, you're probably telling me a BS story. You know, I'm going to listen to you, but I'm not going to take it too serious. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people tell me that. Yeah. But a lot of people tell me that. But and when they do that, I start asking other questions. Describe what they look like, size, And when you have somebody say, and one of the first things you'll hear a lot of people talk about is this: they're wide. They're wide. Okay. They got shoulders. They're wide. They're 3 feet wide. Bears don't have shoulders. They slope down. So, that's kind of another interesting thing I use. As a matter of fact, as far as those pictures and stuff, I interviewed a guy and his wife in 2019, I think it was. He contacted me. He goes, I'm 63 years old. I live in West Virginia. I've hunted all my life. I never believed anything like this in my life. He said, but now you can't change my mind of what I saw. So I went and interviewed him. I actually went to his location. But there was a thing he kept telling me. He kept telling me that made me want to talk to him and go to this location. It was a weird aspect of the story. I'm telling him to describe what he saw, and he's describing. And I was like, what about like the feet and stuff like that? Because bears have different feet. And he goes, I don't remember seeing the feet. And I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting. He told me that like 2 or 3, because I talked to him on the phone 2 or 3 times. And I would interview him, try to ask him different questions and see what I could trip him up on. And he's like, I don't remember seeing the feet. So I go to the location. He meets me at the location, shows me, which the picture on here, like I said, you can't see, shows me where he started seeing this thing. It's 375 feet away from this gravel spot. And he said this thing comes out on all fours. He's thinking it's a bear. So he's just like cruising along, waiting, just starts slowing down. And it gets out in the middle of the road and it stands up in the middle of the road. He stops. And he's like, I'm looking at this thing. He said, I could tell, I'm looking at it. It's not a bear. I've seen bear all my life. It's not a bear. He said, it looked like it was wet, which there was a creek just right, from here to that building over there. And he thinks it waded through that creek. So he comes over, stands in the road, he stops, and he said, then it does this. He said it goes over, the rest of the way across the road, gets on the bank, goes all fours again, which you can't, I wish I had the pictures. And there's a slight bank, it goes up, and there's a rock face. This thing climbs the rock face. So I decided, I was like, okay, I want to interview him and his wife, but I wanted to do it separately when I went to see him. I asked his wife, I said, do you think you could actually sketch what you saw? She said, absolutely. I asked the gentleman, I said, would you mind picking out a face out of this picture? Well, if I had the pictures on here, you could see the similarity between the face that she drew and the picture of the face. But in her picture, you don't see anything below the knees. And I thought that was so cool. I said, I looked at him, I was like, okay. I said, take my son, not in the road, but here on the gravel. You saw this thing. Where was that in relation to the road? So he stands my son there, and I said, I'm going to pull down through here. You stop me where you were at. He stops me. First thing I do is take a picture out the windshield, and I get out, and I said, I want to show you something. He said, what? And I said, look at the picture. What do you notice? And he goes, I'll be damned. They were that close. They were 12 feet from this thing in order not to see the feet. So kind of hard for somebody in broad daylight at 12 feet to misidentify something like that in a bear. So I thought it was pretty cool. How much time? 3 minutes. All right, anybody got any questions real quick? I got 3 minutes. Anybody want to call me crazy? I'm good with that. Thank you all. I didn't realize I was going to get through it that fast, but thanks. And see y'all later. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, Les Odell. Give it up for Les. Thank you, Les.